probably have heard about, like now Ollie is saying that they're no longer Korean.
If you weren't born and haven't been exposed to maybe pressures that would push you into post-traumatic slave syndrome, if you haven't felt that shared, I don't want to say burden, that shared oppression that you mentioned earlier, then you shouldn't get to identify as Black.
I think if we can get, like you're saying, some real narratives out there and to understand more of the context with it and people to be transparent about things from the start, then I think it can help. But right now, the examples have just been, it's either just all about the aesthetic, so there's kind of like an exhibitionism element, or there's some kind of falsehood. Because like with Ollie London, you probably have heard about, like now Ollie is saying that they're no longer Korean. Ollie's saying, okay, I'm now detransitioning back to being a British male, which is what he was born as. And if people desist or detransition, I mean, that's fine, but yet again, it just kind of collapses the legitimacy around this, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So I have a question, actually, because people in my Discord, they say some of the things that, you said that you hear out in the wild. One of the underlying things that they say, well, they don't say it exactly this way, but this is the general idea, is that for you to be born as a white American specifically and identify as a Black American means that you're pretending to be all these things, like you mentioned that people were saying about Rachel. And I think what the underlying of what they're saying there is that if you weren't born and haven't been exposed to maybe pressures that would push you into post-traumatic slave syndrome, if you haven't felt that shared, I don't want to say burden, that shared oppression that you mentioned earlier, then you shouldn't get to identify as Black. Do you feel like you need to have been socialized into Blackness from a young age, or do you feel like transracial, specifically white to Black people, or like white to other forms, because that's what most people have an issue with. Most people don't have an issue with Black people identifying as transracial out of Blackness, but they do have an issue with white people identifying into Blackness.
Yeah. So I think at a minimum, you should have some kind of profound sympathy for that experience, because in truth, there are a lot of Black people who aren't necessarily born poor. They're not necessarily born in the projects. May have access to certain things that very much, some would say, would be a part of privilege. Now, there's the social hierarchy that exists. And so in that, those kinds of things are there so that there are degrees of discrimination, but there are certainly people that are the exception to that. So to say that you have to have a monolithic experience in order to be valid in the race that one was assigned, I don't think that that is something that's true. Like, for instance, yes, I was born Black and male, but I grew up with my mother, with my father. And if you look at the statistics, Black women, the stats I've seen, you have a very high statistical likelihood of having a single Black mother head the household. And that isn't what it was. There was a father and a mother. Now, I had a very problematic father in a lot of ways, as you also read about, but nevertheless, there was a two-parent household there. So does that mean that I'm not valid in some ways in a Black experience, or having some of that because I had that? Also, being an only child, that's also too a little bit different as well. There's usually more than just one child in a lot of the Black households. So my point is that there are exceptions, and I get that certain things prevail over others, but that, I think, goes back to my point of look at the shared experience there, because actually I did have, growing up, I was ensconced in a culture with a lot of white people. The preschool that I went to was majority white, and when we moved to the first house that I lived in, the childhood home, there were a lot of white people in my elementary school just the same too. So in terms of having been inculcated, if you will, yes, I did have that. Rachel Dolezal, for example, I mean, she said that she grew up with her parents adopting Black children, and she had a very, very profound kinship with them, and she was a child at that time, and there are some things from there that she internalized. So that's my point, is that you have to look at the individual. Just to say that, well, if you aren't a part of the monolith, then it's not valid, I think that's unfair, and I think that it's more complex than that. I do get a collective and shared experience that's meaningful too, but if you're looking at the calculus of it all, you should factor in someone's story.